So the epilogue of this repair, you can see originally the car was very sluggish, and it said that the sensor 1, bank 1, oxygen sensor or lambda sensor was faulty, which was that thing there, which I changed. That fault went away, but we still had very low performance and couldn't hear the turbo whistling. So the car, as I say, is on 142,000 miles. So I got a turbo off a 68,000 miler that had a rear end shunt. It was £85 from a car breaker in Oxford, and changed the turbo, which you see, if you want to see how the turbo is changed, then watch the rest of this video. But I've also spent probably 2 days just researching this, because I knew in principle how these things work, i.e. the engine management system with the turbo and what have you, but hadn't really thought it through properly. So anyway, I'll just run over the components. You've got the turbo here, obviously you've got the intake side of the turbo and the exhaust side of the turbo. The engine manifold is down underneath, which you'll see in a moment when we come to take the turbo off. There's the catalyzer. You'll see a lot of people say that the catalyzer and DPF, the diesel particulate filter, are the same, share the same housing. Well, they don't actually. That's the cap right there, and the DPF is under the car, all right, which filters out the diesel particulates and ash, and is supposed to go through an automatic regeneration cycle where any soot that's built up in the DPF is burnt off. And what the car does when it's hot and you're on a run, or at the right predetermined time, which isn't documented, but at some point it'll start injecting a little bit of fuel during the exhaust stroke to put some unburnt fuel into the exhaust manifold, making it very hot, and then by heating the DPF it burns off the carbon that's built up, the soot. All right, so yeah, so the DPF, and on round the back here you've got, on the back of this air intake housing, you've got this little thing down here, which is the boost controller for the intake boost, basically turbo control. And there's a sensor from the engine vacuum, sensor from the manifold pressure, and also a command line from the ECM saying that we can use turbo boost or not, i.e. we're in limp home mode, don't use turbo, because I think that's what happens. The limp home mode on this car certainly disables a turbo boost. Now if we transfer our attention to the turbo, you've got this vacuum operated rod. Pipe goes on here up to the boost control module on there, and there's a valve inside which you can see. You can see that valve, it's so black in there, it's black as black can be. There it is. So there's the valve, and when the boost on, boost off, it opens the boost control to let the actual pressure out. So it bypasses the exhaust boost. I'm not sure what it does. I'm not sure whether it just bypasses the turbine by closing or forces the turbine to be used. I'm not sure which way it goes, but that valve is controlled by a pipe coming out the back of the BCM here, boost control module, down through underneath here. And you'll see later, there's a pipe that goes onto the edge of the turbo. Just there it is, disappearing down there, this pipe here, you can see that, goes round underneath, and then it connects onto this union here, right? Now, having read a couple of hundred blogs at least, or problem pages, there seems to be a series of problems with these. And so if your turbo's not working, what you get is the car will rev but won't really pull, and it will rev, and then you give it a really, put your foot to the floor and try and accelerate down the straight or something like that, and it just hasn't got that get up and go. The get up and go's got up and gone. Then what it is your turbo is just not working. And if you can hear the turbo whistling, you open the door, open the bonnet, rev the engine, you hear the high-pitched whistle. If you're very old, get a young person to listen for it, because you might not have the hearing. It's much louder to my wife than it is to me, for example, because she's a little bit younger than me and hasn't abused her ears like I have. And yeah, so it'll rev up to 3,000 RPM for a while, but it won't pull. It just doesn't accelerate. It's flat it's got no push. Okay, now if you do that a few times, it will then go into limp home mode, where it won't go above 2000 RPM, and you can just about manage 70 along the flat, and if you come to a hill it's pretty gutless actually, and that's when the turbo is disabled. And there's two pipes, as I say, the pipe that goes down to this control valve from the BCM up there, all the way down through there, down round behind the back of there. You'll see it when we strip it down. And there's this pipe here, which is the what is that pipe there? It goes into the, looks like the brake master cylinder, vacuum assist for the brake master cylinder. Probably is, but this pipe goes to the BCM, okay? And if you disconnect this little clear pipe and it's only pushed in there, your turbo won't work anymore. And after I changed the turbo and I could hear the turbo going, the pipe that goes down to this valve here is inside a sleeve, and you need to take it out of the sleeve and inspect it for splits, because you can't tell the condition of the pipe inside from the outside. And check the rubber pipe for splits, check that it's connected properly down at this end here. You can see it there, pushed into that part, if you can see that, but it pushes into the top of the BCM and it goes around here and goes in there, and literally this one, if I can focus on the focusing thing, it'll just pull out, just pops out. And if that pops out, then your turbo, you'll lose all your power, it'll keep going into limp home mode, and it will just be the fact that the pipe has come off. So make sure that it's piped in, plugged in properly. Alright, okay, so there's two pipes you need to check as well, and also make sure the mass sensor is plugged in properly up here, mass airflow sensor. But if you can hear the turbo whizzing, then don't condemn the turbo. I thought the DPF might be blocked. There's a lot of talk on there about the diesel particulate filter being blocked and causing poor performance. But now this hasn't been running for properly for some time, because that turbo there has been weak, not running properly. And yeah, it was a combination of turbos now being fixed, still not working, and that pipe had come off during my assembly. But having looked online, this pipe here is a common cause as well of lack of turbo boost. So check your pipes first is my advice, and check the electrical connections on the DPF, and just make sure everything is plugged in properly before you embark on changing this. But if you want to see how that's done, then carry on watching the video, because in the next stage I'm taking it apart and changing the actual turbocharger. Okay, so check your pipes and check your connections before you condemn your turbo. And this was faulty, but I think it was faulty because the fact that the engine wasn't running properly and it got very carboned up. There's a lot of carbon on that lambda sensor when I took it out, so I changed it as well. So the whole repairs cost me £160 for the parts, plus probably about 2 or 3 hours labour, and then probably 4 or 5 hours reading on the internet, so you don't have to. But that's an amateur's guide to getting your car fixed. But she's flying now. We'd forgotten just how pokey. It's not a fast car, but it does have, you know, a reasonable amount of power when you give it the stick, and it hasn't. It's back back as it was. So yeah, pleased with the repair. Check your pipes, make sure they haven't dropped out. Okay, so yeah, carry on watching for the rest of the video. Yeah, apparently where this pipe frequently comes unplugged, losing the manifold vacuum, there's supposed to be a clip on here that clips around this hose, this major vacuum hose. But the clip breaks and then this vibrates and comes loose. So yeah, I'm going to cut those off, but I've just strapped it back on with some tie wraps to repair the clip, to give it some support. So that's what I've done for mine. Okay, 2009 B180CDI Mercedes. Fantastic car, been so reliable. What a workhorse. 144,000 on the clock. And coming back from Devon, we noticed a noticeable lack of power, and the wife has been complaining about lack of power actually, but that's about par for the course. And I kind of thought, well, maybe it isn't, maybe it is. But when I drove it, it just didn't seem to have the oomph. It went up to 70, okay, 80 on the flat, but didn't have that extra oomph to get it up the hills on the motorway. So it is definitely lacking in power. And the RPM, actually, we did a few tests on it. I don't know if that what finally broke it, but we would put the kick down, and it sort of revved up to 3,000, 3,500 RPM, but it didn't pull. It just revved but wasn't pulling. So we thought, maybe it's a gearbox fault. But on the way back, it just refused. It got to 2,100 RPM, and it wouldn't go any higher than that unless you were going downhill or there was no load on the engine. So under load, it wouldn't go above 2,100. So yeah, so I quickly got on the internet last night. The turbo's down here, look, here it is. There's a turbo at the front of the engine. Nothing, there's the, I presume that's the cat turbo and the intake and everything else. And I got on the internet to ASH Recycling, which is about 20 miles from here, and bought a turbo from this turbo is from a 68,000 mile car that had a rear end shunt. There was a picture of the car. It was 85 quid. So I'm going to plug the analyzer into the car and then have a look and see. Got this analyzer here I use, and just see what the car's telling me. It might be the boost valve, it might be the pressure boost sensor, could be something else, but maybe the car will actually tell me what the problem is. But it's drivable, and around town you wouldn't know it, but yeah, lacking power, nothing wrong with the engine, no nasty knocks or cranks or anything else. It's being well maintained, and it says on the internet that turbos do fail at around 150,000, and that's if they're well maintained. So this one's done to 144, so it could well just be the turbo's tired actually. Anyway, so let's have a look at the analyzer and see what the analyzer says. Okay, so it's saying 3 codes found. Hold this thing in position so you can see it properly. So it says 3 phone. This is basically plugged into the OBDC, yeah, a socket, and you don't necessarily need to do this, but it's just a quick look to see what codes we've got. So let's just read the code, shall we? Stored codes. Sensor circuit turbo code, so it is a turbo related issue. Sensor circuit range performance, bank 1 sensor. O2 sensor positive current control. Circuit open, bank 1, sensor 1. So at the moment it's saying the O2 sensor. O2 sensor positive, current control, circuit open, bank 1 sensor. So it could be the O2 sensor has gone. And scroll down. Glow plug and module, control module, circuit open. O2 sensor circuit. O2 sensor positive, current control, circuit open, bank 1 sensor 1. I think there's only 1 bank and 1 sensor, I think. Glow plug control mode, O2 sensor circuit range performance, bank 1 sensor 1. So it's got a glow plug issue that was from before. I've repaired that. O2 sensor circuit, yep, again. And again. And again. And again. So maybe the actual oxygen sensor has gone, not the turbo. So it's just recurring faults. Now it's got positive current control. So it could be an O2 sensor. Okay, that's enough of that. Escape. What else have we got? Pending codes. Okay, so bank 1, sensor 1. Let's go and check that sensor then. Permanent codes. Okay, model's not supported. So you can do a test down here. O2 monitor test. Selected mode is not supported. Well, there you go. Anyway, let's have a look. Let's turn the ignition off and go and find the O2 sensor. And I think I'm at the front of the engine here, and I think that's the O2 sensor, this thing here. So it could be a wiring fault. And notice there's a clip supposed to be clipped on to stop it rattling, so it might be a stress problem. That's supposed to be clipped onto there to support that cable, isn't it? So it could be a cabling issue as well as the sensor. So I'm going to have a look at that and see what I can find. Right, we can see a bit better now because they're out of the sunlight. So there's a turbo down there, there's the oxygen sensor. The symptoms we were having was low power, and then on the way back no engine management lights came on, but we were limited to 2000 RPM, just a smidge over 2000, and it wouldn't go beyond. It was enough to cruise at 80 on the flat, but as soon as you came to a hill we slowed right down. But there's no engine management lights, and we've just looked in the code reader, and the code reader says the oxygen sensor is open circuit. Now I'm having a bit of trouble getting that plug out down there. Can you see that plug lurking in the depths of there? I can't seem to free that off by hand, so I think I'm going to have to move this airbox off. It's quite easy to get off. You just unclip this, unclip the oil filter, remove this pipe, and the whole thing just lifts up and then slides that way. So it's very quick, so I'm going to take that off so I can actually see what I'm doing. So I'm going to do that now. Well, a bit of an update on the old Mercedes. We had to go away, so I didn't have time to change the turbo. But you remember the fault was that it said that the lambda sensor, bank 1, sensor 1, was out of range and open circuit. Well, I decided to bite the bullet. The old one was very carboned up, but only dusty carbon, so I thought, oh, I'll just stick the new sensor in and then we'll see if that fixes it. But sure enough, within a few miles the light came on again. Engine light this time. No engine light last time, but this time the engine light came on, and now it says turbo insufficient boost. So it sounds like it is the turbo, a turbo air leak, or the turbo boost pressure sensor, which I'm guessing might be in there. I'm not sure where it is at the moment. I'm going to find out. So do I just change the turbo and hope for the best, or should I investigate before? Because, you know, let's face it, the turbo might be good and it might be just the sensor. But anyway, now the new fault is, now we've changed this, the new fault is low turbo boost. So it could be an air leak, could be the turbo, could be a sensor. I suppose it could be a blocked air filter, couldn't it, as well? But I don't think so, because it's been serviced. So yeah, I'm going to check the, first thing I'm going to do is check the turbo piping to make sure there's nothing blown off or nothing split or leaking, I think, before we start to take the turbo off, because it's pretty difficult to get to that. You can see down the base there's the lower flange coupling for the exhaust outlet from the turbo. There's 3 bolts, 2 of them are accessible, the third one is buried up, and there does seem to be a hole in the chassis member which might let you get a very long socket onto the back of that bolt. Otherwise it's going to be a case of probably undoing the manifold to get this off, because I notice there's an oil feed as well which comes up out of the crankcase for the oil drain, which goes down under there, which I'm not sure if it's flexible, so we'll find that out when we take it off. But anyway, so I'm going to check for air leaks and check this sensor up here. I think that's just the MAF sensor, but it may have the turbo boost sensor in it as well, because there's quite a lot of wires just for the MAF sensor. Maybe go and consult the internet again and see if I can find something else to check. Anyway, so if I find anything I'll let you know, otherwise I'll commence with the turbo removal. So I checked this pipe that goes down from the turbo down there, all the way through the intercooler, emerges back up on this pipe, and then into the inlet manifold via the throttle valve and the temperature or pressure pressure sensor. So yeah, I think it is the turbo, because I've done 150,000 miles, and I've taken these, I've hung the airbox up out the way on the with bungees onto the bonnet, as you can see, to keep them out the way, and I've taken these 3 bolts out of here to remove the heat shield. There's an aluminium heat shield over the front, and then I've got to proceed to undo this Jubilee clip down here at the bottom of the turbo, undo this clamp here, undo the top oil feed, undo the top oil feed, and I'm not sure about the underside at the moment. I think they're Allen bolts. I'm not sure I can get to both of them. I'll have to have a look at that and see where we are, and then finally, when we've done all that, remove the actual brackets, mounting brackets on the turbo. Okay, so we'll get to that stage in a minute. So the thing that's causing me concern is the oil drain from under here, is how I get that undone. I don't really want to split this in the middle because the other turbo is complete, already pre-built. So yeah, so this clip next, then that banjo bolt, then this, and then I'm going to investigate how I get that oil feed off. Yeah, so I've removed the clamp that holds it onto the catalyzer. I've removed the top bracket. There's a bracket holding by these three bolts and that bolt. I've removed that, and I've removed the bracket from the engine block as well. And I've removed the banjo. Be careful, there's a copper washer on the top and bottom underneath the banjo and on top, which you could lose, so you need to keep that copper washer handy. So in theory, what I like to do now is undo that clamp down there onto the outlet pipe. It's just an ordinary Jubilee clip or a pipe clip, and see whether she'll come out. I haven't undone the oil feed in the hope, and I'm not sure, but if we look down here through this point, just there, you can see that pipe there in the middle of the picture now. The lower one is the oil feed that goes onto the turbo, and I think that just pushes into a rubber seal, so I'm hoping that will just pull out when I withdraw the turbo. We'll find out, won't we? Okay, so I'm under the car now. I've just undone the three bolts that hold the turbo onto the exhaust manifold underneath. This is this part here, right underneath the car. See this cover? This thing is the exhaust manifold cover, heat shrink, heat shield, and then exhaust manifold. And in there is a hole up the hill there, and up that hole is the only bolt you can get to on the exhaust. I think you can just see that in there, can you? Can you see that in there? But that's the back bolt on the actual bottom of the turbo, and you can see the other bolt there. There's another one I've taken out. Can you see that hole there in the middle? And there's one on the right which you can just about see up through that gap. You can see that hole shining through, and the light shining through the hole. And those two at the front, the spanner goes up under here like that, but the only way I can get them to do come undone was to use one of these flexible drives. It's only bent at a slight angle, but boy, they're tight, but they're very tough bolts, so make sure you've got a good E12 socket, a very good one. And I also used my pry bar, because I tried it originally with just a socket on one of these things here, and it was too tight, but with this, gently swinging on it, eased up, and then they came out, and that's what the bolts look like down there, those things. So that's the three bolts out of the bottom of the turbo, and I think that's going to be the trickiest job. So you're going to need a long extension, one of these things, an E14 socket, and I don't think a 3/8 extension would be strong enough. It might be, but you get too much spring in it. They are very tight, but they're not rusty, they're just tight. Yeah, so I've removed the clamp that holds it onto the catalyzer. I've removed the top bracket. There's a bracket holding by these three bolts and that bolt. I've removed that, and I've removed the bracket from the engine block as well. And I've removed the banjo. Be careful, there's a copper washer on the top and bottom underneath the banjo and on top, which you could lose, so you need to keep that copper washer handy. So in theory, what I like to do now is undo that clamp down there onto the outlet pipe. It's just an ordinary Jubilee clip or a pipe clip, and see whether she'll come out. I haven't undone the oil feed in the hope, and I'm not sure, but if we look down here through this point, just there, you can see that pipe there in the middle of the picture now. The lower one is the oil feed that goes onto the turbo, and I think that just pushes into a rubber seal, so I'm hoping that will just pull out when I withdraw the turbo. We'll find out, won't we? Turbo out, and it has been rubbing. You can see in the if I just show you the old turbo, you can see there's not often a lot of witness on this, but if you haven't got anything concrete, then look down there. Can you see where the blades are? Can you see that matte sort of scuffed look around the actual tips of the blades? That's where it's been running off centre, so You can't really tell very much actually, but I think that's what's slowing it down, because you can see the matte coloration just there at the tips of the blades where they've been rubbing on the actual housing. That clearance has to be very small and very precise, and they must never touch. Otherwise it will just never spin up to speed. Now if we have a skank down this one, quick scan of this one, you can see that isn't there on that one. It's all clear by the look of it. So you haven't got that matte section where the turbine blades are going. So turning our attention to this, I did undo these two bolts. So the oil feed pipe is this one here, and there's the two Allen bolts. They're loose at the moment. There's a gasket as well, but I did struggle and undo them with a very long extension poked up under here to get to that one. But when I took the whole lot off, you can see that hole down there is where the pipe came out. So at the end of this pipe here, the oil return goes in, slots into that hole down there in the lower casing. So I'm thinking I can put this on, maybe not tighten it up fully, but because I can't get it rotationally correct, but I might just put it in so it will turn and turn like that on the you can see, just nip it down slightly, because I think it's going to be very hard to get that bolt back in, the back bolt back in on the end of a very long socket with a universal joint attachment as well, a flop all over the place. And the size of those bolts, anyway, for your reference, is, this is the thing I got it out with, you can see, and the size of it is a 5mm, yeah, a hexagon 5mm socket. It's not Torx or anything, but that's what I got it out with in the end, from underneath. But it may not be necessary. I shall try putting this back in and see whether I can align it properly. So I'd much rather put it back by turning this and locating it and slotting it down, this part, than trying to get that bolt located. At least they're in location. I should be able to tighten them up in the same way as I undid them. Okay. So I did manage, I slotted it back together quite easily actually, and that pipe did slot in down there, the oil return pipe. That one down there did go in, sorry, the bottom one down there, you can see it just in the middle of the picture. This one down here, right at the bottom, you can see it there now in the middle of the picture, did slot in. So I put it back together assembled, so the nuts and the bolts and the gasket is in position, but I just need to tighten those two up now when it's in position, which shouldn't be too difficult because I managed to undo them, so I can do them up. So fiddling, getting those back in and getting them started is not an issue. Copper washer under here, copper washer on top of there, and put the banjo back, put the clamp back there, put the mounting clamp back on there, put the 3 bolts back into the exhaust, not forgetting the gasket, and yeah, and then put the pipe back on and everything else just reverse. Oh, make sure that you put this, there's the turbo wastegate suction valve, make sure you put that back on. It just pushes on. Make sure you put it back on before you manoeuvre it into position, which I just forgot to do, so I'm going to try and get that back on now. So I've overlooked that, so I might have to wrestle it out of position, put that back and then put it back again. We'll see, I'll let you know. So there's the arrangement with the bolt in the end that does the back of the rear. There's the arrangement with the bolt in which goes into the back fitting on the exhaust output of the turbo. It's a long socket that goes through the hole in the heat shield on the exhaust manifold and done from underneath the car. Well, she's all back together, and yeah, now when you start it up you can hear the turbo whistle, you can hear that noise. So the turbo wasn't going before, there was nothing dramatic, no smoke, just lack of boost. So yeah, that's fixed. So the new turbo is in. Just going to take it for a test drive and see how it goes. If you like the video, then subscribe down there and leave me a like, and any comments, I'd be interested to hear them. So yeah, good luck with yours.